Some time ago I was in a situation with a small group of monks, and I had mentioned doing something which I wanted some help with, and I was lightly scolded to do the work on my own, and it was in a fairly joking way. But I noticed in my mind the immediate feeling of fear and shame and embarrassment. And later I could reflect that it wasn't really a big deal. It wasn't a big thing. And I think there were two situations that drove that. One was the initial very, very light scolding, and then the secondary, seeing one of the monks laugh about this. But then also looking up and seeing him kind of go to a couple of other monks and then laughing with them. And I left the situation in a sort of bitter way, but noticed how, a few days later it just wasn't really a problem at all. Didn't feel very strong. But in the moment, this shame, fear, embarrassment came up, and I think we've all been there. There was that sense of fear around being criticized in a group, which is interesting how different it is that when that comes up with just one person, one-on-one, or if it's done in a very skillful way, in a very quiet way with another person who's actually quite careful about the reception of that other person, or who has it in their own mind that they're doing it in order to help that other person, rather than to kind of wag their finger and tell them they're wrong. That feeling that comes up it's still difficult, because we have this sense of preservation of self, or preservation of a sense that how I am is how I define my own goodness, or how somebody else thinks I am, or the way I behave. And then that gets kind of brought up, and we are told by the Buddha that we receive feedback as a rare and precious gem, that we wouldn't want to be parted from that potential with other human beings to essentially give us some feedback about how we're doing. And no matter the situation, whether we feel embarrassed in a group, or even if it's difficult with another person, we often think, or there's a sense for some of us that we're being handed, like instead of a gem, like more like a handful of like excrement or something. It's like it's just not treated as something that we want, something that we'd rather drop or not get our hands dirty with. And reflecting on the fact that this abated within a day or two, a few days, there just wasn't any feeling of negativity around it, or that strength of embarrassment. I think that it's important to keep that in mind, the anicca element, when we receive feedback. Because if we can't, then we get caught up very much in wanting to defend ourselves. And when that sense is absent, then there can be a sense from others that, this person is, if they receive feedback well, if any one of us can receive feedback well, then there is a protective force around that, where people feel very comfortable rather than fearful to give us information about ourselves. And that's quite an important aspect for any of us who are practicing the Buddhist teachings, because there is a sense that we can't, and it's very rare for anyone to be able to do it alone, to be able to do this practice without receiving instructions, feedback, help from others. And so if we keep that in mind when these situations arise, whether we're in a group or we're within just another person individually, of course we can appreciate that care that's taken from another person who genuinely wants us to understand where there's a problem, when they come up to us in a very careful, caring way. We can appreciate that, but it also doesn't mean that we want to run away from situations where the feedback can be extremely uncomfortable. And we can do that in one way, and just one way is just to remind ourselves around the sense of anicca, that all is changing, and also to remind ourselves that, well, even if this other person's wrong, I can explore that in myself and see if there's something there that I need to look at, some truth, because the embarrassment often hides that truth, or the shame hides that truth. It's like, this isn't true. I'm a good person. There's no problem with this. And that's because we're often defining ourselves in that way, based on the fact that if we were a good person, then there would be nothing wrong with me, which is very far from the truth. And I remember one time a couple of monks, myself and another monk, Ajahn, were talking with Bhikkhu Bodhi, and he was here visiting, and Ajahn, I think, spoke second, and he said, "How is it that you appear to have so much humility? How have you developed that?" It's not an easy question to answer, but he answered a bit about it, and then at the end of his answer he said, well, essentially, if you want to learn humility, you need to learn to be willing to be humiliated. So if we can be welcoming of that, even though it's one of the things that would really bring up for us a sense of usually wanting to protect ourselves, if we can sort of let down our guard and allow that in, then we have the ability to be imperturbable, to have true equanimity. We can be like a broken gong that doesn't resonate when it's struck. And by doing that, then we receive this gem in a way that we can see it for its true value, that it has so much of a hidden potential to teach us about ourselves, even in the very moment that we're receiving it. So I offer that for some words of reflection this morning.